What happens is, in Lord of the Rings, in the third book, you have these two little hobbits, which definitely are Christ figures, especially the Frodo, the guy that has the ring. And boy, if you ever want me to do the Christ imagery, Tolkien was a very, very, very literate and deeply devout Roman Catholic who rightly said that he never set out to write a book trying to depict anything. He hated that. He hated allegory. In allegory, you create a little... Actually, the Narnia Chronicles are allegorical, and J.R.R. Tolkien was a good friend of Lewis, and he didn't like the Narnia Chronicles because, Lewis said, I'm going to create this lion who will be a Jesus figure, and everything the lion does will have symbolic meaning as to how Jesus operates with us. Tolkien didn't do that. He believed that what you do is you take the Christ narrative deep in your heart, and then you just do your art as an artist, and it just shows up in all kinds of ways that you don't have control over. But basically what happens is there's this dark, evil lord, the Sauron, who created a ring of power, and he put his own evil power into it. But he lost it, and he's trying to get it back, and if he gets it back, he'll be able to totally take over the world. But anybody who puts it on his own finger would actually be able to throw down the evil lord, because you'd be so powerful, but it's evil power, and therefore eventually you would turn into another evil lord. And so over the years what happens is everybody that comes into connection with it feels like, hey, the way for me to save the world is to use the ring of power. And finally one person comes up with the idea, or a group come up with the idea, that what you have to do is you have to do the one thing that is unthinkable. You have to take the ring of power, go back to the original place where it was forged, the volcano, Mount Doom, and throw it in. And, of course, as he gets closer and closer and closer, he's got this ring around his neck, he gets closer and closer, and the ring itself just becomes this enormous weight. And he really is very much a Christ figure, because what he's doing is he's saving the world through weakness. He's not using the ring of power, but he's destroying the ring of power. And the ring of power just sort of consumes him. And there's just some tremendous lines, which is exactly what Jesus would have said when he was on the cross. And so that's where it came from. And it's in fact, I could even tell you what chapter it is, but you don't need that. What's the line? What's the place where Sam says, do you remember, the pond back, Kathy might remember it better than me, the pond back at, home? Do you remember the grass outside of your... He's trying to cheer Frodo up. The line goes like this. He says, I have no memory of grass or flower or water. He says, there's nothing between me and the fire. He says, when I close my eyes, I see the fire. There's a ring of fire in front of me, and I'm absolutely naked. He says, I'm naked in the dark. He says, no veil between me and the fire. And so it's in a sense, what Jesus has done, you see, is instead of coming to earth and taking power and putting down wrong, what he's actually doing is he, as Dr. Clowney used to say, he didn't come to bear the sword, he came to receive the sword, to suffer from the sword. He didn't come to bear the sword, he came to have it run through him. So that's where I got the quote. One of the problems that I think a lot of Christians make when they tell the Christian story is they don't bury the narrative deep in the cultural form. So what was, to me, brilliant about Tolkien, here's a guy, he's a professor of Anglo-Saxon, he's probably one of the 3 or 4 people in the world at his, in his heyday who knew the most about Old English, the language, and Gothic and Icelandic and Finnish and Northern European pagan prehistorical roots. And what he did was he said, did you know, for example, Northern European mythology, you know what Götterdämmerung is? You say, well, yeah, it's got something to do with Wagner. Do you know in Northern European mythology, the denouement, the final sort of Armageddon, is that the gods and the heroes of all the centuries are resurrected to battle against the monsters and the ogres and the demons and all the villains. There's this huge battle on this particular plane to see who's actually going to win the world for the rest of eternity. And the gods and the heroes die. That's what's called Götterdämmerung, is the twilight of the gods. They all die. The good guys lose. And that's how history is going to go. And the Anglo-Saxon, the Northern European mythology was, that's okay, because nobility is to be good even though you know you're going down to a never-ending defeat. That was nobility. A high doom was before the hero, that I'm going to do what is right. And actually, what's interesting is if you've ever read The Dream of the Rood, which is an Old English poem, but it's a Christian poem because Christianity came. They were fascinated by the idea of Jesus Christ going to the cross. That's nobility. Knowing that the right thing to do was to go down to this terrible defeat. And that got into the Anglo-Saxon world and sort of, it came in. It wasn't a complete head-on collision between what Christianity said. The pessimism of the Northern European world met the optimism of Christianity, and it changed the pessimism. But the idea of nobility and heroism and valor and doing what's right, even though you're dying as you do it, was not really changed. It was redeemed. Now, Tolkien tried to imagine the Anglo-Saxon mythology, which is all lost because those dirty French-speaking Normans came over across the Channel in the Battle of Hastings and wiped out the Anglo-Saxon culture. We have something like 45 pages of Anglo-Saxon ancient literature, and all the rest of it's gone. So what Tolkien said is, I want to imagine what all that mythology would be like. I'm going to imagine, and they have to be pre-Christian. But I'm a Christian, and therefore what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine pre-Christian mythology sort of cleansed of a lot of its pessimism. Yes, even though if you read Lord of the Rings, it's sad. It's a very sad. He wanted to keep that, and wanted to keep the idea that you can't win without losing, at least as much as you won. And he kept that because he loved the sadness, and he felt that was part of. He thought that was Christian. It was pre-Christian. It was common grace. It was general revelation. It was revelation that came to them even though they weren't Christians yet. It was truth. So what he tried to do was he tried to enter into these ancient myths and preserve the truth and actually, enhance it a little bit from a Christian perspective. And when it was all done, he's a great example of this because there's no overt reference of any sort in the Lord of the Rings to Christianity or religion or even God. But when you're all done, you feel cleansed with it. When you read the thing, you say, I've read a holy thing. I feel cleansed by it. How did that happen? He buried the narrative, the storyline. So you have Gandalf's the resurrected Lord, and Frodo's the suffering servant, and Aragorn's the returning king, and you've got it everywhere. But he doesn't have a Christ figure. He's got so many of them. So if he had a Christ figure, if he had an Aslan or something like that, then it looks like a Christian fable or a parable.